as a new land was being carved out of an untamed frontier.
Just dropped in to see how you boys is
The
doing.
Last of the Mohicans, probably the most famous tale of the French and Indian War. It's got it all. Courage, loyalty, love, sacrifice, and a fair amount of scalping. The backdrop, the American frontier, when it was still firmly under the control of the British Crown. Ah, the good old days. James Fenimore Cooper wrote the book in 1826. Since then, it's been dragged onto stage and screen more times than you can count. Let's be honest, for most of us history buffs, the Daniel Day-Lewis version in 1992 is the one that sticks. Brilliant film. That forest ambush scene, fantastic cinema. The soundtrack, epic. The uniforms, surprisingly accurate. But how much of it is real history? In this film, we're heading back to the 1750s to see what the redcoats were actually up against and to find out if Hollywood got it anywhere close. The story is set during the 1757 siege of Fort William Henry. That's bang in the middle of the French and Indian War, or as we Europeans like to call it, the 7 Years' War.
Your Majesty, North America isn't worth the trouble. Let Montcalm invade it. Withdraw our forces and concentrate our armies here in Europe, the main theatre of war.
The trouble started in the Ohio Valley in 1755. Britain and France were squabbling over who controlled what was, frankly, a giant forest. A young George Washington was there too. In fact, he was right at the heart of it and commanded the first operation. At that time, of course, he was one of the good guys. Anyway, for the British, the conflict went downhill fast. The French strategy was dreamed up by the governor of New France, as it was called, the Marquis de Vaudreuil. I can't say that. By the way, let's pause here. People often comment, you can't even pronounce the names. That's right, I'm British, and if I get foreign names right, they'll take away my passport, so I have to be really careful. Foreign names should always be mispronounced. It goes without saying. Canadian-born, cunning as a fox, he worked out that the best way to stop the British was to never let them gather a big army in the first place. Hit the frontier with raids, keep the Brits scattered and scared, and Canada would stay safe. And it worked. With thousands of native allies, packs of Canadian hunters, and tough marine troops, the French ran circles around the redcoats. Forts fell, settlers fled. From New York to the Great Lakes, it was chaos. Then in 1756, along came Marquis de Montcalm, the French regular commander. He threw thousands of men at Fort Oswego and took it in short order. British Colonel Daniel Webb was meant to relieve the fort. Instead, he didn't. Too slow, too cautious, and frankly too scared. The result, Oswego fell and some of the wounded prisoners were butchered in the aftermath. A stain on Webb's reputation, and one he never shook. It was also a concerning foreshadowing of what was to come. By the way, to grow this channel and to keep the stories of British military history alive, I need you to do me a favour and hit the thumbs up, comment and subscribe. That tells YouTube you like this sort of thing, and it also helps others to find the channel. If you're really keen, then you can also sign up for my Patreon page, costs about $5 or so a month, and gets you early access to my films and podcasts, as well as exclusive content not available anywhere else. Okay, back to the Last of the Mohicans. Now, Fort William Henry was important because it was a key British strategic location that protected the Lake George waterway, a vital link between New York City and Montreal. It also served as a staging ground for attacks on French positions. In the story, the main character Hawkeye and his Mohican companions rescue the daughters of Fort William Henry's commander from a Huron ambush. And this does reflect, historically, the British really were struggling. Moving men and clearly young ladies and supplies along the frontier was a nightmare. French raiding parties owned the backcountry, let's be honest. And the French were leaning into this tactic. By 1757, Vaudreuil had mustered around 2,000 native warriors at Montreal. Montcalm was thrilled. He knew he couldn't really control them, but he admitted they were as vital in America as cavalrymen were in Europe. And so the French came by land and lake, about 10,000 strong, and by early August they had surrounded Fort William Henry. Inside were men of the 35th and 60th Royal American Regiments. They held the place under Lieutenant Colonel George Munro. There were also militia troops, bringing the total British forces in the vicinity to over 2,000 men. Nearby at Fort Edward was Colonel Webb, yep, the guy from earlier. He had a large force, but Webb being Webb, he sat there and stayed sat there as the siege progressed, despite many letters from William Henry CO Colonel Munro begging him for assistance. Anyway, Fort William Henry was solid, but the guns were worn out. From the 3rd to the 9th of August, the French pounded away. 3 feet of earthworks gone, British cannons silenced one by one. Munro had no choice. Reinforcements were not coming, and under the rules of civilized war, once you had made a decent stand, you were allowed to surrender with honour. So Munro did.
I accept your terms, sir. The fort is yours.
Now, here's where Hollywood does its thing. The book and the films all show some kind of massacre after the surrender. How accurate is that? Well, the book is frankly the worst. It kicks off with a Huron warrior killing a baby and then its mother. Grim even by 19th century melodrama standards. The 1992 film is less ghastly, but still a bit off. Strangely, the old 1936 version is closer to the truth of how it all began, even if the uniforms look like they were borrowed from a school play. So what really happened?
We have no scalp. We are without honor.
Munro had surrendered on honourable terms. The garrison could march out with their weapons, personal property, and even one token cannon. Not bad given the circumstances. But no one had asked the native allies what they thought about it, and they were furious. Thousands of warriors and Canadian militia had turned up expecting loot, captives, scalps, spoils of war. You get the picture. Instead, Montcalm handed them nothing. The night before the surrender was carried out, some warriors actually raided the hospital and barracks, killing and seizing the wounded. One witness, Père Roubaud, a French Jesuit missionary, recounted that while many seriously wounded were protected, several unfortunate English were attacked and killed. He even went so far as to tell of a warrior proudly displaying a human head as a treasured trophy. Ghastly stuff. Word spread, and by morning, when the British column began to march out with unloaded muskets, the dam burst. Warriors and militia surged in, extorting prisoners, grabbing baggage, killing anyone who resisted. Sounds a little bit to me like the massacre at Cawnpore during the Indian Mutiny. I've done a film about that. But anyway, the numbers are hazy. Maybe 200 killed, perhaps another 183 or so carried off as prisoners. It wasn't a massacre of the entire garrison, but for the families caught in it, including women and children, it was a bloody and horrible disaster. Montcalm eventually pushed his own troops into the fray to restore order. Some of them were even cut down. Rumours spread like wildfire. Survivors staggered to Fort Edward with tales of 1,500 dead. Newspapers lapped it up. The legend of a massacre was born. In the 1992 film, Colonel Munro is portrayed by a Scottish actor and is killed in the massacre by Montcalm's native allies, the leader of whom, Magua, cuts his heart out as revenge for Munro killing his family. The reality is that Munro actually survived the massacre but died of a heart attack not long afterwards. Some say it was a broken heart at what had befallen his men that led to his death. So was it all a massacre? Well, by strict numbers, no, not really. Out of 2,500, most lived to fight another day. But it was enough. Civilians were murdered, soldiers humiliated, captives dragged away. It stained Montcalm's honour. And it wrecked the French alliance. Montcalm spent months ransoming captives and apologising, but his native allies weren't impressed with his scolding or his stinginess. Thousands left in disgust. New France would never again muster such a force of native warriors. The next year the British came back swinging, as we always do. A massive army of 18,000 marched on Fort Ticonderoga. Montcalm held them off, his greatest victory, but the tide had turned. Louisbourg fell, opening the St. Lawrence, and in 1759 Montcalm and Wolfe both died on the plains of Abraham outside Quebec. That was the beginning of the end for France in North America. So that's the real history behind the last of the Mohicans. Cooper took some liberties, Hollywood added more, and Daniel Day-Lewis ran through the forest with his shirt open. But underneath all that romance and drama is a real story of redcoats, French commanders, native allies, and one of the ugliest incidents of the 7 Years' War. And let's be honest, as historical films go, Mohicans still beats plenty of patriotic epics we could mention. Say no more. Special thanks to friend of the show Josh Proven for researching and co-writing this episode. Pronunciation mistakes are all my fault. I've put a link to his YouTube channel below. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe. In the meantime, YouTube and me think you're going to enjoy the video that's on screen now, so be sure to check it out.